Okay. So what we're looking at today is essentially planned economies and traditional economies. So to start, we're going to look real quickly at what they call a traditional economy. Basically, this is kind of what you would see in very rural parts of the world. Think more like kind of tribal atmosphere. So not like really anything we see here in the United States. But this is basically going to be a system in which people produce and distribute goods and services kind of based on the customs, the things that they have done for generations, um, generation to generation. So in these economies, you're going to see really, really specific gender roles. So basically, all the work is going to be divided along gender. Men are going to do certain jobs, women are going to do certain jobs, and that's going to be simply the way it is. There's going to be no real deviation from that or change from that. It's basically they're going to follow those customs, and they're going to continue to follow those customs basically day in and day out. And at the end of the day, their main goal is to survive. All right. In this type of society, they're they're typically not worried about accumulating wealth or having money or having nice possessions and things like that. Their main goal is just to make it to tomorrow. What do they need to do to today to survive and make it to tomorrow? So, with these types of economies, again, not like anything we see here in the United States, but there are some pros to this. Those three economic questions that we talked about with scarcity, the what to produce, how to produce it, and who are they producing it for, those are answered. Okay, what to produce? Well, when you're talking about these types of economies and these civilizations, there's not a whole lot of technology. There's not a whole lot of ability to obtain resources that are not right there in front of them. So what to produce is basically what do they have right there? What do they need to survive? Okay, there's no argument over do we need these luxury items or not. It's basically what do we need to make it to tomorrow? How are they going to produce it? They're going to produce it the way they always have. That's where the customs, the generation to generation handing down of the ideas and the way that they live and the way that they do things. That's where this comes into play. And who are they producing it for? Well, they're producing it for their village, their civilization, basically their families. What do they need to make it? So there's not, well, we're only going to make it for these people, or we're going to make these nice luxury cars. No, it's what does our group of people need, our family here, what do we need to survive? And when you're living basically on the edge of survival, that's all you really need, is to be able to answer those questions. So that is a pro. But overall, the negatives, the cons greatly outweigh these benefits. So very resistant to change. Those defined gender roles. I mean, think about it in the United States. We don't have this anymore. We don't have where women can only work certain jobs and men can only do certain jobs. People can kind of do whatever they want for the most part. There's no defined roles that you have to follow in order to make it in society. Um, the idea of no wealth in a lower standard of living. Um, Typically, if your main goal is to survive each day, you're not worried about building up a large sum of money. You're not worried about, um, all these luxury items, all the wants. You're basically just going after the things you need, and you're not going to live a very, luxurious lifestyle. It's basically just going to be, hey, this is what we have. This is what we're going to go with, and this is where we're moving forward to. So that's traditional economies. We're not going to spend a ton of time on those because we don't really see them a whole lot. Okay. So centrally planned economies. These are things that we see in the world today. They're becoming more and more prevalent. If you look at Europe, Europe has a lot of these ideas. Here in the U.S., we've been more resistant to that. We have more of that freedom where American citizens want to have more control over their own life and kind of what they do. But we're starting to see some of these things creep into our government. Are they going to have, let's say, free public college for everybody, or free healthcare, like nationalized healthcare for everyone? Those things like that would be more of a centrally planned economy. So when we see these, typically the central government's in charge. They're the ones that are going to answer those economic questions. Okay, the questions of what to produce, who are we producing it for, how are we going to produce it. This is not going to be in the hands of private businesses like here in the United States, where we have lots and lots of private companies, companies that were started and run by people like me and you. You're going to see in these types of economies, the government have more and more control over these questions and answering these questions. So if you're somebody that does not like government interfering in your life, then centrally planned economies is not what you would like. If you're somebody that wants a little bit more structure and um, you know, in a way, fairness where everyone gets kind of the same thing, regardless of what that thing is, then centrally planned governments are more the way that you would want to go. So, where did this idea all start from? Okay, there's a guy named Karl Marx, and you've probably heard of him in U.S. history, maybe. He became popular during kind of the Industrial Revolution in Europe, and there was a lot of inequity between people who owned factories and workers in factories, and the workers felt like they were practically being taken advantage of, like they were almost slaves because there was nowhere else they could go. And so he saw this happening, and he starts basically going around. He writes a few books. He does speeches in public. Kind of becomes this figurehead behind this idea of socialism, or even that's where we get the extreme Marxism. And so he would go around and talk about this struggle between the workers and the owners of these factories. And his idea was, well, how can we make it more equal so that everybody has a more equal share? So we don't have the top 1% that are really, really rich and everybody else. Okay, that was the plan, kind of make like a utopia. And so he wanted basically the workers to overthrow or start a revolution however they saw fit, whether it was through violence or whether it was through nonviolence protesting, whatever he thought it needed to happen. And we needed to basically reestablish this world order, and make it more for everybody. Okay. So while he's traveling around, he meets this guy named Frederick Engels, and traveling around, speaking to people in Europe, he starts basically kind of having, like, how people have campaign rallies today that are running for public office. That's basically what he's doing. And he would go to these factories and talk to the workers and get these workers kind of fired up, by telling them, hey, they don't care about you. They're not going to take care of you if you get hurt. Don't you feel like you should earn more money? Look how rich they are. Look where they live and look where you live. You're working 16-hour days every day of the week. That's not fair. And if you're a worker at this time and you're living in, absolute poverty, this is going to sound really appealing, because he's going to you saying, hey, I'm going to basically, we need to reset the world order. We need to reset, and you need to have more power. You need to be more in charge. And we need less of these top 1% rich people to kind of take over and have all the money. And now you have to remember, at this time, there was no laws that protected workers. There was no minimum wage. There was no 40-hour work week. There was no disability if you get hurt on the job. There was none of that. So, you're working in a factory. If your arm gets, mangled and you can't use it the rest of your life, it was tough luck, but, we're not doing anything about it. And I'm going to fire you because you can't do your job. And so there was none of that. So as a worker, this sounds really nice. He's talking about, well, we're gonna pay you more. Everyone's gonna get their fair share. And basically, what he wanted was the government to own the means of production, basically factories. He said we shouldn't have private business like factories. So where an average citizen should not be able to own a factory and pay an individual, barely any money while they live in poverty, and that owner just gets richer and richer. He said that's not right. We should have laws. We need to change that. We need to change it to where the individual doesn't own the factory, the government owns the factory. And now you work for the government. And because we're the government, we're going to pay you what we should pay you. Okay. So this was one of his famous quotes. Okay. Workers of the world unite. You have nothing to lose but your chains. Again, feeding into that idea of wage slavery, how they were basically slaves to cheap wages, no protections, no rights or anything. It was basically you worked or you didn't, because if you didn't want to work for such a cheap wage, well, there was 10 people behind you ready to take your job, and then you were out and had nothing. Okay. So as a worker, you're looking at this and you're kind of like, this sounds really good. Why wouldn't it sound good? Because you're making 25 cents an hour, not doing anything, and basically working until you die. This guy comes in and says, hey, you want to make more money? You want a fair share? Do you want more, better place to live? All this stuff? Well, I can do it. Just let the government take care of it for you. Okay. That sounds really appealing. Okay. Here's a couple photos. Here's Karl Marx on this side on your left, and here's Frederick Engels on the right. You can tell Frederick Engels, he actually grew up the son of a factory owner. He actually comes from more money. And you can kind of tell he just looks a little more put together, even though, they both got the massive beards and everything from the time. But Karl Marx just looks a little more disheveled, just not quite put together. So what this boils down to, okay, socialism. All right. Socialism is not a type of government. Okay, socialism is a economic system. It's a philosophy on how to basically run an economy of a country. Okay, so you see that word thrown around a lot. You see, like Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist. Okay, what that means is, as Bernie Sanders, he wants to basically, if he were to ever become elected president, he would want to use our government, our democracy, okay, in order to implement socialism. Okay, so we don't have socialist governments. Now you hear that, Venezuela, socialist government. Well, they have basically a dictatorship that is, basically hidden behind the facade of socialism. Okay, so what it is, social and political philosophy based on the belief, okay, that democratic means should be used to evenly distribute wealth throughout society. Okay, government owns the means of production. So again, when you start taking things and you move them from private ownership to government ownership, that's what they mean. So private businesses, private, industries, things like that, those would no longer be private. Okay, one of the big ones is nationalized healthcare. Okay, right now we have a private healthcare system where you go out and you can purchase your own private insurance. You can kind of pick which doctor you want to go to. You can pick which procedures you would like to get, and if you want to get them, now you have to pay for them. Obviously, it's more expensive, but it's all up to you. Whereas if you were to use socialism, and this is how Europe does it, you take private healthcare and you turn it to a nationalized healthcare system, meaning the government is fully in charge. So when you need to go to the doctor, the government basically pays for it. They pay the doctor. You don't pay the government. Okay. You basically, when you need a prescription, you go get a prescription and it doesn't cost you anything. It's free. Okay. In a sense. Now, like we talked about with trade-offs, where does the government get their money? Okay. Those doctors are not going to work for free. So a doctor is not going to perform a surgery on you for nothing. Okay. That doctor is going to get paid, and the government is going to pay that doctor instead of you or your private insurance paying them. Well, we know that the government gets their money from taxpayers. Okay, so when you go to work and you get paid and you see on your pay stub that federal withholding amount, that's the federal government taxing your paycheck. Okay, so if the government's going to pay for healthcare, that means the government has to have more money. Okay, so where is the government going to get that money? Well, they're going to get it from tax dollars. Okay, depending on who they start taxing more. They're going to have to raise taxes because that's the only way the government can afford to pay that doctor. Whereas right now, if you break your arm and you need to go get a surgery done, you pay whatever your insurance doesn't pay. Okay, but it's all on you and your insurance. It has nothing to do with the government unless it's a Medicare or Medicaid system or situation. Under nationalized health care, the government will pay for everything, but the government only has money to pay for things through taxes. So the idea, what happens is you basically lose the option to buy healthcare and pay for it yourself or not. Under a nationalized system, everybody will pay for their health insurance. It will just be done through taxes, which remember, you have no say over. So this is the argument. Do you want to be able to go out and buy your own insurance out of your own pocket if you choose to, or your employer is going to pay for it if you want, or not have it at all and run the risk of, well, if I break my arm, I'm going to have to pay for it out of my own pocket, which a lot of people do that. Okay. Or you take the nationalized healthcare system approach, and it's basically the government will pay for it through tax dollars, which are automatically deducted out of your paycheck. And then you use it if you use it. If you don't use it, you're paying for it and you're not using it because it's coming out of your tax dollars. So basically, it all comes down to that idea of freedom and freedom to spend your money where you want to. Okay. Some people prefer, again, not buying insurance at all and running the risk if they need it. They're just going to have to pay out of their own pocket. Other people like the idea of buying their own insurance system or their own insurance so they can keep going to a certain doctor or whatever it might be. Okay. Other people like the idea of having national health care and saying, well, if the government is going to pay for it and they want to raise my tax dollars, that's fine. If I get sick, I go to the doctor and I don't pay anything. Okay. But you put way more power in the hands of the government. And so some people don't like that. And that's the big debate that we're having right now. Okay. But we're going to stop right there for today. We're going to pick back up with this on Tuesday, and we'll talk a little bit more about the healthcare. So now you'll have an assignment to do.